Center for the Ethiopian Educational Information and Communication Technology presents Educational Satellite Television Programs.
Hello, teacher. Hello, students. Welcome to today's lesson on the human and democratic rights situation in Africa since independence. In our last lesson, we learned about human and democratic rights as enshrined in the Ethiopian Constitution. We discussed the relationship between human and democratic rights. In this lesson, we will turn our attention away from Ethiopia specifically and focus on Africa in a more general way. We will learn about the human and democratic rights situation in Africa. If you are ready, students, we will begin this important and interesting lesson. Most African nations have been independent from colonial power for about 5 decades. The situation in an African nation after the withdrawal of a colonial system of government was very complex. In fact, many African nations plunged into civil war after they gained independence from their colonizers. Students, take a moment to write a list of the problems that may have confronted African nations after they gained their independence.
Students, let's get ready. Begin. Time's up. Let's get back to our lesson.
Good work, students. It is not a difficult task to create a list of the problems that African nations have faced since independence, is it? Some of these are problems of economics and environment. There have also been health-related problems. One of the things that makes Africa so unique is its incredible diversity of peoples, languages, ethnicities, religions, and cultures. However, this diversity has led to some complex situations, often precipitating countries into civil war. Colonization leaves a lot of problems behind, including bitterness, anger, and confusion. We have begun with a discussion of problems historically facing African states since independence, so that we can move on to look at how these problems are being resolved in the present. In recent decades, one of the most positive movements in Africa has been the spread of human and democratic rights across this huge, diverse continent. Let us begin by discussing the human rights situation in Africa. As a legal concept, the notion of human rights is relatively recent in Africa. The United Nations system, international law, and the African Union have all contributed to the establishment of a human rights system in Africa. This has positively influenced the advancement of human rights and justice. Students, have you heard of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights? On the screen, you can see its symbol. The Commission is responsible for interpreting the Charter on Human and People's Rights as stated in the African Charter. The Commission came into being in 1986, when the African Charter was accepted. It meets twice a year. For the first 2 years of its existence, the Commission's Secretariat was located in Addis Ababa. In 1988, it moved to Gambia. The Commission is responsible for the following 3 areas: promoting human and people's rights, protecting human and people's rights, and interpreting the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Students, how do you think the Commission fulfills these responsibilities? Discuss this question with a partner.
Students, let's get ready. Begin. Time's up. Let's get back to our lesson.
Hello again, everyone. The Commission fulfills its responsibilities by collecting documents, undertaking studies and research, organizing seminars and conferences, and spreading information. It also encourages national institutions involved in the area of human rights and sometimes offers advice to governments. While the spread of human rights has sometimes been slow in Africa, it is nevertheless taking place across the continent. More work needs to be done. For instance, women and children continue to need protection against discrimination and violence. However, the news is ultimately positive, and it is important to know that institutions like the United Nations and the African Union are supporting the dissemination of human rights as a legal concept. Students, we have talked about the close relationship between human and democratic rights. Democratic rights are also spreading throughout Africa. There are many positive examples of the spread of democratic rights in the African continent. On the screen, you can see a photograph of Nelson Mandela. He is viewed as a hero around the world for his persistent promotion of freedom, equality, peace, and democracy in South Africa. Botswana is another good example. Here you see the flag of Botswana. Since gaining independence in 1966, Botswana has consistently held multi-party elections. It was blessed in its wise founding president, Sir Seretse Khama. It has not been easy for democracy to become deep-rooted in Africa. Nevertheless, the habit of democracy is steadily catching on. Let me tell you about two positive African trends that are promoting the spread of democratic values. One is the imposition of term limits on leaders. This means that a leader will be in power for a limited term, after which an election is held. This keeps the leader from becoming too comfortable in the role of power. Another positive African trend is an initiative toward transparency in governments and corporations. If governments and major industries publish details about their actions, people can keep themselves informed and make wise voting choices. Students, democratic rights include a lot more than simply the right to vote. What are some other democratic values, institutions, and rights that need to become deep-rooted in Africa?
Students, let's get ready. Begin. Time's up. Let's get back to our lesson.
Well done. I am sure your ideas are excellent. The spread of democratic rights in Africa requires independent courts, nonpartisan civil servants, a free press, the rule of law, strong educational institutions, property rights, and constitutional checks and balances. Students, we have talked about human and democratic rights in Africa. In our next lesson, we will learn about citizens' obligations and duties. Until next time, thank you, teacher. Thank you, students.